First of all, welcome to everyone. It's great to once again invite you back to a webinar and Paranoia-X. The Paranoia conference in itself may be postponed to May 2021, but we will keep on presenting insight and share stories with you throughout. Today we are so fortunate to have with us not one but two actually leading cybersecurity experts, each considered thought leaders in their fields. We'll go from strategy and the helicopter perspective into the very core of security operations actually. So you're all in for a treat this morning. First, it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Ms. Kjersti Stathopoulou. This summer, the Deloitte cyber team secured themselves probably one of the most experienced and sought after leaders in tech. She's named one of Norway's 50 leading women in tech and has over 20 years of industry experience, 11 of which are at the global Telenor group. Kjersti is very passionate about building and executing security strategies, working on transformation programs, and works, by her own words, every day to change people's perception of security, which is music in the ears of a security practitioner. Rumor has it that she has also a great passion for gaming, and in particular strategy games. So when she's not walking and talking security, she's probably digging into that. And I think perhaps security practitioners can learn something from gaming and vice versa. The word risk, not only the game, but the word risk comes top of mind. Today, though, she'll dig deep into one aspect of securing your business, the part that is often overlooked and perhaps more visible these days, the people part. So without further introduction, I hope your cups are filled with warm coffee. Kjersti, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Tormod, for the nice introduction and also the invitation to share some thoughts on security culture and the people part of your security strategy. And it was Sun Tzu who said in The Art of War that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before death. So we're going to take a step back, and I will share with you where I believe your starting point should be for your strategy, with a focus on the people part. And your strategy should end up in tactics or an action plan, if you prefer. But to hear the part on the action part or the tactics, you have to join us in Oslo next May for the Paranoia conference. So that's where we will bring in the solution. My target is that in about 30 minutes from now, you will include people in your security strategy and not only focus on your technological risk, threats, and remediations. If you haven't already done so, that is. And if I have really succeeded, you will also think a bit different about people's place in cybersec and how you communicate. So Tormod, he did a really nice introduction. And I want to emphasize that I'm on a mission to do good. I believe that cyber practitioners, we have an important place in society, and we need to work to help people understand what cyber threats and risks are all about. So I really appreciate this opportunity to share some thoughts on how I see things. So let's get started. We can't really talk about strategy before we have agreed what a risk is, because it's one of your key items of your security strategy, and it's to make sure that you put your money and your time where it is most valuable. And you also need to be able to track your progress. So the risk is the starting point. Now, a risk, that's the chance that something bad might happen to you. And I do think that we have enough real world experiences to know that bad things can and probably will happen to you if you work in a company with a system connected to the internet. Some companies know this better than others. And unfortunately, most people, not servers, people, need to survive a major incident before they understand the consequences of a cyber breach. The consequences, they can both be serious and they can be costly, both at a business and at a personal level. You can lose your job. The company can go south. And not to mention the stress it is to be under a critical incident. And we split people, we can split people in two categories. It's actually active and passive. And unfortunately, the most of the time, the road to become active happens through the pain of a breach. So it's the first place to start is to understand risks and your risks. And then we have the next part, which is culture. Famously, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, why is that? We have many different types of culture. It's football culture, it's political culture, party culture, and security culture. And all of them, they have a few things in common. It's based on what you know and what you do. Very simplified definition of culture. But to complicate things, you have your visible culture, which is your strategy, your policies, your guidelines, and then you have the invisible culture, which is actually how you get things done. And in cybersecurity, we do talk a lot about awareness, the what you know part, but here comes the difficult one. How can you actually change people's behavior when change is not logical, but it's based on feelings, people's emotions? So you can actually pour out articles, phishing campaigns all day long, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will change. So does it work? Does changing behavior actually reduces risk? So let's take an example. It's my favorite example. It's from the automotive industry. And the numbers that I will share with you, it's from Norway. So I guess that in if the same was in US, you can I don't know, 10, 20, 30 times triple these numbers. But in 1958, Volvo invented the 3-point seatbelt, and they actually gave away the license for free to all car manufacturers. And it wasn't actually until 1971 that it became mandatory to install belts on the driver's seat. Never mind the kids sleeping in the back seat. That was apparently not that important. And it was actually not until 1984 that it became mandatory to actually use the seatbelt. So it took about 30 years, 25, 30 years from the license were shared or where it was invented until you actually had to use it. And in 1955, 213 people unfortunately died in car accidents. And the number kept rising year over year until it reached a top in 1970, and it stayed high until 1985, so the year after it became mandatory to use the seatbelt. And during those years between 1970 and 1985, around 400 to 500 people unfortunately passed away. And here comes the interesting part. So in 2018, half as many people died in car accidents compared to 1955, even with tripling the number of cars. I believe the number was 117. So the number that you see here, it's not 1920, it's 1920. And it is the number of people who would probably have died if we had the same risk profile in 2018 as in 1955. So there were a 90% risk reduction, where people using seatbelts stands for most of the reduction. And still today, it's the highest risk. The authorities, they claim that we can bring down the numbers another 40% if everybody used their seat belts always. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's safe to conclude that technological innovation, change in regulation, and change of behavior reduces risks. I can hear the sound of virtually heads nodding. So is this directly comparable with cybersecurity? Yes. And isn't your target behind your cybersecurity strategy to reduce risks? Yes. Can you feel it? 90% reduction by combining technological innovation, regulation, and change of behavior. And then came COVID. Out of the blue. In the beginning, it was something very distant to me. I was passive, and it didn't affect me very much. I was reading about it in the news, and I had some hiccups in delivering some things due to some closed factories, and then it came closer fast. And then I became active. And it wasn't until I understood that it could actually affect me and my family that something bad could happen to us. A risk. So we changed our behavior to reduce the risk of catching and spreading COVID, and we more or less spent all our time at home. And now you know that most accidents happens at home. And it took about a week after Norway closed down during the pandemic before we had to visit the emergency room because our youngest son fell off his bike and broke his arm. And the funny, not so funny, is that I had told my friends after a few days after the lockdown that it would be a miracle if we managed to stay at home without the kids breaking anything. And it took a week. So I knew about the risk. Thankfully, kids are superhumans and they just grow back together in no time. And we were happy, of course, that it didn't end any worse. But COVID-19 brought on some more risk than in increase in accidents at home, because millions and millions of people starting to work from the home office only. And the threat actors, they are smart people too. And it didn't take long before we saw a high rise in phishing attacks. One of the biggest problems were that we didn't really have a global pandemic too high on our risk charts, but we did really have to act fast without too much preparation in terms of the lockdown. So millions of people all over the globe, they took their work PC home and started working. And maybe the company were not prepared for this. Maybe they had spent most of their cybersecurity budget on their office network and protecting their servers, but not so much focusing on, for example, endpoint protection of the laptops and mobiles and tablets. And maybe, just maybe, they didn't really have a good security culture to begin with. They were just not prepared to move the workforce out of the office. So you spent your cyber budget on securing your office networks and servers. but did you learn your employees on how to change the standard username and password on their internet router at home? No. So with admin or admin 1234, anyone can connect to their home router. Okay. If you are like me, you have tons of stuff or things connected to your Wi-Fi. I stopped counting a while back, but there's laptops, iPads, mobiles, watches, vacuum cleaner, lights, electrical heating system, is the Lego robot and all sorts of toys. It's our doorbell, alarm system, and it's apps from God knows who, because I willingly download free games on my kids' tablets to buy myself 5 minutes of peace and quiet. And in all of this is your company's laptop and mobile phone. I do really hope that you've added some protection on those devices. VPN? No. Email security? No. Two-factor authentication? No. Well, then maybe now is a good time to start thinking about it. And it takes just a click, right, on the wrong link. Actually, you don't even really need to click anything anymore, but that is another talk. But even worse, what if you or your company had to let people go and say goodbye to employees while they were at the home office with your company's laptop and mobile phone, and maybe they were not too happy about being let go? Maybe you did a bad job at communicating to them and support them in the time of crisis and fear, and even maybe illness. And maybe you did not shut down their access to the systems immediately after you told them that you had, unfortunately, to let them go. And maybe, just maybe, they had a lot of important information and client data stored locally on their laptops. And maybe, just maybe, a competing company called to recruit them because they heard that your company is doing layoffs. So your employee is sitting there with grudge and information that they willingly shared with your competitor because they also need a new job. They need to feed their families. And this, my friends, that's called insider's threat. And it poses a bigger risk during the pandemic for several reasons. For one, your process of letting people go is probably not adjusted for home office only, and people are isolated. They're at home with no or limited social contact. In addition, there might be people who find working from home more stressful, and it's hard to balance work life and family life. And your work has moved into our homes, want it or not. But is people's home part of your company's network architecture? No, probably not. And let me tell you, it's good times for cyber criminals. And they can and they will exploit us. But there's one thing that I cannot understand, and that's how they can attack hospitals with ransomware. And remember, they're just people too, the ones that are attacking us. You know, they wake up in the morning, they drink coffee, they send their kids to school, and then their job is to find our vulnerabilities. But I hope that if any one of them sees this talk, you know, leave the hospitals alone. You also have a mother, a father, or maybe even children. And what if you need help, but you couldn't because some criminals locked the hospital down? It's okay to have some integrity, even if I don't agree about how you make your living. And here's a free tip from for your cyber policy. Write it down. Make it a commitment. We will not pay ransom, ever. We will have backups and we will have processes for responding to and recover from attacks. We will practice what to do and keep our business continuity plan updated. And we will, most importantly, not be part of funding criminals because you don't know what that money is used for. First of all, they spend it probably to innovate better tools to attack us, but it can also be used for drugs, trafficking, and terrorism. And we will never end this story and create a digitally safe society unless people stop paying. So that is the finger. So to summarize, the pandemic has changed your risk picture and threat landscape, and you don't have to anything actually, but you should revise your risk and mitigation actions, looking at people, processes, technology, and regulation. And then let's get down to the security strategy. It actually starts with asking yourself some questions before you can find all the right answers. My advice is to start with finding, what's your most important assets or crown jewels, if you like. It can be, I'll get back to that point in my next slide where we're going to talk in the same setting, but around people. But you need to find out what do you actually want to protect. And then you need to look at what is your threats. I advise you to do some threat modeling, to see who's out there, who would like to harm you. And sometimes it's not, you're not the target, you're just unlucky and you're taken down on the road, like we see with the Pattaya. And then you need to see, what's your vulnerabilities, and they should be fact-based, should not be based on fear. These are all things that you should know about your company, your assets, your threats, and your vulnerabilities. And then you can start to map out your risks. And a risk is, as you remember, the chance of something bad happening to you. It's the likelihood, and it's the consequences of that risk. And then you can look at your most important risks and decide what to do with them. And then there's another one as well that I think adds a lot of value, and that is to find your maturity level. Now you can look at, for example, NIST. They have a very good model in terms of maturity. You can do a self-evaluation of how good are you in the different parts of your organization. And some advices for the road, it's to work with facts and data, not with fear. You don't need fear. You have all the facts that you need. Prioritize your largest risks and low-hanging fruits. I've seen companies spending 80% of their time, effort, and cyber budget on the least important risks. So the biggest one is still there. So map them out. Revise minimum yearly, and preferably also do an internal control on your policies. It's well worth money to do that. And if you don't have an internal control organization inside your organization, then it doesn't cost that much to have someone to come and do it for you. And then you can also maybe get an objective or better objective view. And maybe it's also easier for somebody external to come and check how you're actually doing. And the internal audit is to actually check that you are doing what you're saying that you are doing. And please, I beg you, know how to respond to a breach before it happens. It should be the minimum. Those 72 hours, if we talk about regulation, GDPR, before you have 72 hours before you need to contact authorities if you're in Europe. Those hours, they're going very fast. If you don't have a plan, and you haven't practiced it. So please do that. And the first time that I was part of a security incident, you know, it was an absolute nightmare because we didn't really know what to do, and we didn't really know who was actually the one calling the shots. You know, was it the CEO? Was it the head of the CERT team? Was it the CISO, the CIO who had to shut down the systems? Was it the crisis manager? You know, it was a complete mess. And it's more complicated than what you think. And no, a cyber incident is not the same as an IT incident. You might want to take some different choices. And the last one is to never let perfect stand in the way of good. It will never be perfect. And the threat landscape is changing so fast that it's better to actually start somewhere and do something than to wait until you have mapped up everything perfectly. Because by the time you've done that, the threat landscape has changed anyway, and probably you have to take a few steps back. But then if we look at the people part, so it's the same. Not much really have changed, right? From the last picture, we just added, you know, the view of the people. So it's people attacking you, and it's people protecting you. It's not a war technology on technology. It's people developing that technology, developing the tools to protect you, developing the tools to attack you. And so people are the ones who are exposed to the risk. So if you then change your view a little bit, and you think about, you know, who is the most exposed people, and I don't say the most important people because it might not be the same. It could be that it's actually your system administrators who have all the accesses that you want to make sure that you actually protect the most, more than maybe a CXO, because we work on a very high level and might not have the credentials to the actual systems. And here is one part. I often ask clients, so what is the most important assets? And 100% of the time, it's a system. But if a system goes down, do you still have a business? Yes. If you lose all your employees or all your people, do you still have a business? Probably not. So I think that people should be the number one on the list of important assets to any company. And then is who can be a threat, and it can both be inside your company and can be outside your company. And I don't say now that you should view all your employees as insider threats. That's not going to help you when you want to communicate and help people to change. But you need to be aware that the risk exists, and you need to deal with it. What's people's vulnerabilities? You know, it's or why are they vulnerable? Talk to your HR department, find ways to help them to balance their work life and family life or life in general. What bad can happen to them? Quite a bit of bad things, but you know, they're not, you're not weak or dumb if you are the victim of a cyber attack. You're actually the victim of a criminal offense. So it's also something around how we view people and how we communicate to them. And what is your security culture? And that's also the part of the maturity. And remember, security culture is not only people only, it's your technology, it's your processes, how you comply to regulations, etc. So treat people with respect, be approachable or likable. Train people, share knowledge, communicate in an understandable language. when you communicate your security strategy, it needs to be, you need to be able to communicate that in a lot of different language, the language of the CFO, the CEO, the CIO, your security managers, the IT departments, the people who are paying the invoices. You know, you need to make it in a language that they can understand. And here we do have some challenges as security practitioners, because we like to, or we're accustomed to, and we have this habit of using, you know, lots of difficult abbreviations who people outside of the security industry will not know. So you need to learn their language and communicate to your stakeholder in the language that they will understand. I would also beg you to incentivize wanted behavior, not punish unwanted behavior. But of course, people need to follow the policies, and if you don't follow the policy, it can have a consequence. But when you do communicate, it's better to try to get people to actually help you protect your business, and also help and care for people when they are at their home office. In the new normal, people are different. Some people live in a very small flat. They don't have a lot of space. You know, it's something about sitting here every day, having very limited social contact, and that can do something about you, and we don't really know the long-term effect yet. Which brings me down to my actually last point. Let's say that they are right. You've probably seen this. People is the weakest link. And some people, they claim that the people risk, it caters for 50 to 80% of the cyber risk, which is not untrue in one setting. If you look to, for example, insider threats, 69% is of the breaches comes from negligence, or from neglecting, you know, policies and what you should do. But then I think it would make a really good business case to train and protect your people if you can actually remove half of your cyber risk. Then can you explain to me why we spend 98% of our cyber budgets on procuring and implementing technology if people stand for 50% of your risks? So let's you know, do a short experiment. If you switch that mindset and you think about people as or humans as the strongest link, what happens? Does anything change? Would it change how you communicate? And I'm really, really strong believer that if you look upon people and you think of them as weak, you communicate with them in a different way than if you look at them as part of your solution and not part of your problem. So I hope that I gave you a very, you know, a good and brief introduction to security strategy. I hope that you also have gotten some food for thought in terms of your security strategy and how you think about people's place in cybersecurity and how you will start to communicate with people. And with that, I want to say thank you for again for having me here, Tormod. And I believe that we will have some time for questions.
Absolutely, Kjersti. And thank you very much for sharing that presentation with us. I wish we had that presentation early March. And I also wish that my parents' generation had that presentation back in the 70s, but that's how it goes. We have some comments, we have some questions. there is a question coming in asking, in the tech regulation behavior triangle, can one in general say anything about which measure gives most bang for the buck?
Which measure gives most bang for the buck? Yeah, you probably can. It's a really good question. I think it differs a bit because it comes down to who you are and what you are protecting and who your threat actors are. You know, are you exposed to ransomware or to nation states hacking? And I think you need to take all of this into consideration before you start mapping out your actions or mitigation actions.
Agreed. And I also see that there is quite some interest in the topic. So I guess we'll have to explore this further down the line. There was a question coming up. Where do you stand in terms of using gamification for security training?
I think it's great. I think it's really, really good. Because we should try to make cybersecurity fun, and gamification, at least for me, it's a fun way of getting engaged. And it's a you know, and also there are companies out there who provide labs and cyber ranges where you can get more of a real life experience, and it's something else than sitting on a tabletop practice in an office. Because you can't really feel the heat, but you do that when you have to take decisions then and there, because it's difficult when you are under a lot of stress and pressure.
Absolutely, and probably one of the best ways to tackle risk is to have experienced it up front. So anyone who's skidded off the road in their car knows about having too much speed going into a curve, for instance.
Yeah.
It's all about experience.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely. Final question, which probably needs a bit time to answer, but you'll have to see. Are people becoming more aware of threats because of the new normal, or are they less aware in your experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in some sense we're actually becoming a little bit less aware because we're less connected to our business. I mean, it's a really tough leadership challenge now to make people feel part of your business and your community. And it's not the same to meet over Teams as it is in physical presence. I don't say I want to go back to being in the office 5 days per week, but you know, it's harder when you're sitting on Teams. So I think that you need to work really hard on all the levels, and especially with your HR department, to find ways to connect people and to be part of and feel loyalty to your company. And also because we are, you know, fatigued. We start to get tired. It's stressful, and then you start to do not mistakes, but you start maybe to be less aware. And not to mention that when COVID came, priorities changed. Projects were stopped. A lot of programs I've seen out there, you know, has stopped or reduced speed. So it doesn't have the same high focus that maybe it had a year ago.